who has 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Last Councillor. I just want to focus in on a particular topic of my own contribution, which is the impact of this proposed tax in relation to homes that have been flooded and homes that bear the risk of flooding in the future. There's been much focus in on this bill regarding the issue of market valuation and the challenges that it poses, particularly for urban areas. And the point I want to emphasise to the Minister, and I've already raised this with the Revenue Commissioner, that it's absolutely vital that this new system includes the risk of flooding in the future as a means of assessing market value and the valuation of properties. If you have one home that's been flooded, or a street that's been flooded, beside a collection of homes that have not been, it's obvious that the flooded homes have a lower market valuation than the homes that have not been flooded. And it's essential that when homeowners receive their proposed market valuation in and their bill, that they're allowed to reduce it in recognition of the fact that when they go to sell their homes, the value will be lower due to the flooding risk. I've already raised this issue with the Revenue Commissioner, and the Revenue Commissioner in the Public Accounts Committee decided that this was an important issue and it should be included. But in this contribution, Minister, I suppose I want to emphasise two particular points to you. The first issue that I believe is important is that this should be proactively communicated to homeowners as part of the publicity campaign that the Revenue Commissioner is undertaking. This is something that her office confirmed they would do. I believe it's very important that this happen, because when people receive their bill, what many people will be inclined to do is just agree with the market valuation and not recognise actually that flooding is something that reduces the valuation of their home. And the second issue in relation to this point is that people should be clear what is the proof that they can keep in order to ensure that there are legitimate reasons why their market valuation is reduced. And I think the clearest example of this is in relation to whether a homeowner can or cannot get home insurance for their property. If they can't get home insurance for their property, then clearly that means the market valuation of their home is reduced. That also must mean that the taxable liability of their home is reduced as well. And I say this in the knowledge, Minister, that there are some homes in the constituency that I represent, and I'm sure it's the same for Deputy Humphreys as well, as I know parts of his constituency are subject to the same flooding as my own is, that have not been flooded in the past, but because they're adjacent to areas that have been flooded, they can't get home insurance either. And it's just so important that when people go through the process of valuation, they understand that risk of future flooding or inability to get insurance for their homes are legitimate reasons for reducing the proposed valuation and ensuring they pay the lowest tax possible. Because while many of us, particularly in urban areas, are very conscious of the costs of a market valuation approach, if it is market valuation, it has to be consistent, it has to be coherent, and it has to ensure that if homes, due to no fault of their owners, have a flooding risk and therefore have lower market valuation, that this is accepted as a clear reason for reducing the taxable liability of their property. And as I said, in the Public Accounts Committee, this is an issue that I raised with the Revenue Commissioner. She agreed with my explanation of what market valuation could mean. But given that this does affect so many homes across the country, I would be grateful if the Minister could make reference to this in his own concluding remarks. I'd also emphasise the point that if local authorities understand that the revenue they're getting in is being reduced due to flooding risk, then this should reprioritise even further the work that has to take place to ensure that more homes in the future are free from flooding risk and are free from the huge difficulty of their own properties not being able to get insurance. I just want to focus on a number of other areas in relation to the bill before I can just make reference to some of the people that are opposing the bill and proposing the property tax that's included within it. The first one is in relation to an area that Deputy Mitchell touched upon, which is in relation to where the money goes from the revenue-raising measures that are included in this bill. And I think, Minister, it's very important that we do more to clarify this for taxpayers. My understanding at the moment is that the government has committed that 64% of all of the revenue that's raised from behind this bill will go back into local authority areas and will go back into county and city councils into their revenue to allow them to spend that money locally. I think it's just crucial that we make this clear, that we make this a requirement. I would go so far as to say it should be legislated for. Many of the homeowners and people that I represent in Dublin Central do not want to pay this tax. It does represent further hardship for them. But one of the things I think we need to be able to demonstrate back to them is the money that's been raised is being spent in the areas in which they live, is being spent on the additional housing projects that matter to them, on the additional public services that they're continually that they need and that they require in order for their communities to be safe and as secure as possible. And then the balance of that money that is left after money has been reallocated out to local authorities, I want us to be clearer regarding how that money is going to be spent. I want to see this tax get to a point that if it's raised within the Dublin area, that's it invested within the Dublin area. And then if areas outside of that find that the tax rate that they're charging on local properties is not sufficient to meet the needs of the people that they represent, then what they should do is increase that rate. We should be in a situation where the tax rate that applies to counties is one that is equivalent to the level of services that people within those counties need. And I'm conscious that from in the near future, local authorities will have the ability to set their own tax rates within a certain corridor. And I want to see that used, I want to see it changed by county, and I want to get us to a point that people within Dublin who are paying this tax can see the benefit of it locally, and that we make it a legal requirement that the money be invested back into the local authority area within which the revenue is initially raised. A third area I want to touch on is in relation to Section 6 of this bill and Section 7.3 of the preceding bill, which brought in the property tax itself. And this is in relation to the different definitions that are there in relation to social housing. And the definition that's in this bill here today in Section 6.
The Deputy's 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Last Count Quarter. Regarding exemptions being put in place for housing that's provided for people with disabilities or with severe needs. In discussion with social housing organisations today, one of the things they want to clarify is how the Revenue Commissioner is going to implement this and to ensure that housing stock that they supply, in other words, that's not provided by local authorities, that meets the needs of people who otherwise would not be able to get housing, that the Revenue Commissioner clarified that Section 6 of this bill here does include them, and that they have the clarity regarding the money they're going to need in the future. And this is of particular importance because some of these housing associations are looking to raise their own money in the future. And their inability to do that is going to be, greatly reduced if they're not clear on how Section 6 of this bill will apply to them. So I'll conclude on those points, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Deputy. In the next time slot, Deputy Dara Cleary. I believe, Deputy, you're sharing time with Deputy Moynihan.
Yeah.
Is that correct? 15 minutes and 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this tax. I want to pick up where Deputy Donoghue just left off there. It's hugely important that we bring clarity to the social housing sector around this. And this is the entire difficulty with the manner in which this bill is being rammed through second stage today, and the chance of actually bringing clarity to those sections at committee stage, which will be done in a matter of 90 minutes or so on Tuesday. And really important issues like that, and like the issue around actually clarifying in detail the provisions for those people, the exemptions for property bought or adapted for people with permanent disabilities, that needs to be worked out in very intimate detail. Because once revenue committers get it, they implement it as exactly to the letter, and we need as representatives to understand what it means and what provisions are in it. But we will not have the chance to do that. And surely when you bring in a finance local property tax amendment bill, 6 weeks after you bring in the finance local property tax bill, you should have learned from the first time that ramming it through the House and getting it over and done with it as soon as possible, particularly at committee stage, where we have a chance to go through these details, isn't the way to do it. And will we have a finance local property tax, another amendment bill, in April or May, when a lot of the issues that are being raised by deputies here become apparent in the implementation of this tax? And really, as I said yesterday, you know, when we cannot get answers to those details and to those very legitimate questions and very legitimate concerns, what we are doing here today is essentially a charade. Coming back to the overall bill, you know, this is going to take €250 million out of the domestic economy this year. Once these letters start arriving out to people's homes in the next few weeks, it will take €500 million next year. And this at a time when we are having further indications yesterday evening from the CSO about how serious our domestic economy is at. Yes, the government are talking up the export economy, and it is doing incredibly well. And our exports are powering ahead. All of our multinational investment is doing well. But at the same time, our domestic economy is either not growing or is beginning to fall back in some areas. And if we keep taking money out of that economy, and if we keep taking the ability of people to spend money within that economy away, it's not going to grow. We're not going to get job growth. We're actually going to get further job growth. If you look at January, the retail sales figures, the department store sales are down by 15%, bar sales down 8.1%, motor sales down by 3.6%. Motor sales in one of the most important months of the year for the motor trade, a trade which employs some 50,000 people around the country, that is hemorrhaging sales. Bar sales down 8.1%. When you see bar sales and genuine consumption and choice, people do not have money. They don't have it. And where are they going to find it to pay this tax this year? And even if it is a half year and it's being introduced in measures, they're still not going to have the half thing. And we all know it. Every single person in this House has had people in their clinics in the past 6 months, and particularly in the past number of weeks, when it has become apparent how much you're going to have to pay. And there is no exemptions for people who are struggling. No exemptions for people whose lives have been transformed by this economic crisis and who may have had the ability to pay this tax 4 or 5 years ago, who built large houses. Like a lady who was with me recently in my clinic who built a large house in a rural area, had the ability and the capability with her husband at the time to build this house and sustain this house, but because of a tragic accident her husband no longer works. He's on disability. He's on disability pension at the age of 35, and he's genuinely so. She's not in a position to work, she can't get a job. And now we're saying to her, she's not finished the house is unfinished, it's not an unfinished estate, she doesn't have the services that many people take for granted. But we're saying to her that you're going to have to pay €500 or €600 this year, and a full amount next year. She doesn't have it. 50,000 people whose mortgages are in arrears, whose family home mortgages are in arrears, they don't have it either. But yet we're going ahead in some sort of bubble, thinking people will pay and thinking people can pay, when it is very clear they can't, and they just do not have it. And that is why we showed other ways of raising this money, through consumption taxes, through people having a choice on consumption and paying for the consumption extra tax and paying the overall amount through extra tax. But no, this government just decided to pursue down this line. And, you know, Minister, there is a very serious 2 weeks ahead in this country as people grasp this task. A point I made last year, or a year and a half ago now, and a number of deputies have touched on it here this morning, is people are going to get this invoice from the Revenue Commissioners. not so much an invoice, more of an instruction. And they're actually genuinely asking, what are we getting for this? Now, I heard Deputy Donoghue with his Dublin jersey on saying, "Oh, what gets raised in Dublin should stay in Dublin," and yada yada, that's good for the troops. But the reality is, if you're in a rural area, what are you getting for this tax? You have to pay for your bin, and the other cry by people, the Troika, proposing this tax is that it's a European-wide model, and everybody in Europe pays a property tax. Well, if you pay a property tax in Europe, you get your litter, you get street lights, you get a range of local government services. Here, what do you get? You don't, Minister. Be serious. Because of you, we're going to pay for water. We're going to pay for water, Minister. We're going to pay for litter because of your government's policies. We're paying for water. We're paying for litter. So what are they actually getting? In rural areas, you don't get street lights. You don't get decent roads. So people are saying, yes, show me what I'm getting for this tax. And I asked Minister Hogan back in November 2011 when the household charge was, I think it would be very just courteous but also relevant to people to show what they're getting in terms of development and that. So hopefully on this occasion, and I welcome the fact that whilst you're pursuing this tax, you are actually trying to make it easier to get it paid. I welcome the involvement of An Post on this occasion. But people want to know what they're getting in return. And when they're being asked to pay, a couple of €100 this year, upwards of a few €1,000 in some parts, that's the very least you can do as a government is actually get your pitch together and say, this is where this money is going. This is going into local development. This is going into local services. And this is what it's going to do, and this is what it's going to sustain. They don't want to see that it's paying for reams of administration. They want to see specific, measurable products, like any of us would if we got an invoice in for that amount, and like any business would have to justify for the kind of money they're paying on this. There was so many lost opportunities in this amendment bill. So maybe in the amendment bill, which will inevitably follow because the way this legislation is being driven through the House, it could be looked at. The Deputy McGrath spoke this morning about the pyrite exemption and that how different houses are going to be treated differently in relation to that, and that how every house in an estate that has a name of pyrite is impossible to sell, but that only specific houses in these estates are going to be exempt. That's an issue. Secondly, as I said at the beginning, we do have to clarify the issue around property used by charitable bodies and property bought or adopted for people with permanent disabilities. So I've had a couple of queries, and Revenue, and in fairness, as always, Revenue are helpful at providing information. But people whose houses have been adopted because of age, who can no longer, and we've all got the housing adoption grants, who can't use a good bit of their house because of infirmity, are they exempt from the tax? We see the whole issue and the whole notion of court awards, and people have had to make substantial changes, and that's welcome. But if the change to your house or the change, if your disability is due to age or infirmity, do not apply and do not count for the same sort of exemptions that are included there. I think secondly, it is incredibly difficult at this stage for people to really appreciate what is the value of their property. Properties are coming and going. I'll give you an example of an estate in County Mayo where in December a house was sold through the standard sales procedure of an auctioneer, etc., for €80,000. And an exact same equivalent house 4 doors up was sold in January by a bank for €40,000. So how do you value that? How do we value in that house, in that estate, what band you're in, when there's that kind of stuff going on? The property register will probably will show that. So if the house in the middle of those two houses, are they worth 40,000? Are they worth 80,000? And the amount of distress sales, you go down to Shelburne today, Minister, there's another all-stop sale on, you can't get in near the Shelburne. Those houses are being sold today. The people who are living in those estates, how do they value their houses versus what prices are going to be paid for them down there today? And this is the difficulty for people who will actually try and make an effort to go out and put some sort of a value in their house. There's nothing in this bill to say to them, look, we really appreciate you engaging with this process. We really appreciate the fact that you're willing to go out and put a formal valuation in your house in order to comply with the law. We're going to give you a tax credit for what you're going to pay for an auctioneer to do that. That's practical things to try and assist people in this process. Because property values are so all over the joint at the moment, the people who genuinely want to engage in this process are going to find it very hard to do so because of the lack of support available to them here again. We have gone through the points of negative equity, squeezed middle income that this is going to be added onto. You know, the mortgage arrears crisis is just worsening as the days go on, and there seems to be some sort of movement in the past few days at banks beginning to realise what kind of crisis they have. But when you look at 86,000 residential mortgage accounts that are in arrears of over 90 days, which has increased from 81,000 to June 2012. These people collectively owe €15 billion to various banks and various institutions. And while there's a small slowdown, that is a huge amount of money that is left out there, and that we're now going to add another tranche of debt onto them and onto what they have to pay. So they can't pay their mortgage, but we're going to give them a tax based on what might have been once an asset, but which is now clearly a millstone around their neck. So this tax is very much a millstone tax for so many people who are not in a position to pay their mortgage, not for any choice that they have made, not for any lifestyle choice that they have made, but because for genuine, they are not in control of what has happened to them over the past number of years. Negative equity is a huge issue for many people, and they too are in houses where their mortgage is far greater than the house that they're in. We're going to put a tax on negative equity through this as well. And again, add to their woes and to their worries about it. So there was so much to do, so much that could have been done with this amendment bill. There may be in the amendment bill that you could look at, Minister, and Minister Noonan could look at, because as this tax rolls out, and as the letters arrive into people, you will get an idea of more problems. And again, I come back to say what I said at the start. We are fooling ourselves. We are fooling ourselves if we think this is a proper way of doing legislation. The fact that you come back in here after 6 weeks with an amendment bill to a bill that was rushed through in 9 hours, and secondly, genuine concerns and stuff that we're trying to tease through and work out will be rammed through this House in a committee stage of 90 minutes, I think, next Tuesday. And you know well, you're long enough around this House to know that committee stage where we can tease out these things and come up with answers. And you know, we cannot now today give answers to the social housing groups, the charitable bodies, to the various groups who have concerns around that. And I suspect we may not be able to do so on next Tuesday either.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Moynihan, who has 5 minutes.
And I thank Deputy Cleary for allowing me the 5 minutes to contribute to the debate. And I suppose, you know, to contribute to the huge concerns that are out there, to reflect the concerns that are out there in relation to this bill that's going through the House and the concerns that they have in relation to ability to pay. One of the issues that there's a number of issues. There's one, you know, on the energy rating. Every house now that goes through a transaction, be it for sale or transfer, there's an issue in relation to having a cert in relation to its energy efficiency and so forth. And I'm wondering, you know, will there have to be something done in relation to that in the bill? Because the vast majority of houses that would be ending up paying tax certainly won't be able to provide this cert. And I think there's something that needs to be looked at, because if on the one hand you're saying that it's necessary for a transaction, how can you say that it is viable for a property tax on the other hand? So I think that is an issue that needs to be teased out and needs to be looked at. Also, there's an awful lot of elderly people that are, you know, living on their own, and they're talking about, you know, wills and, you know, making wills for their property going forward. And indeed, you know, they don't have to be elderly. There can be people that are in the full of their heart are making, but their concern is in relation to the value of the house, that they're going to put a value on the house. They think the value of the house is so much, and then are they, when the estate is going through probate and everything else, is there going to be another liability on the estate because of calculations that were made at a time when they thought were the exact calculations? And you know, the issue has been raised in relation to Dublin, and many speakers have spoken in relation to it. The other issue I would say is that how can you put a value on a house that's tied onto a business, be it a small business or be it a farm? You know, and if you have a house that is, you know, down a cul-de-sac laneway at the very end of it, and if it was put up for sale, it was tied in to a number of other properties, the value of it would be, there probably wouldn't be any sale value in it. And how is the revenue going to put a value on that property? And these are a lot of the issues that are being teased out by the general public. They're major concern in relation to their ability to pay, and I suppose the biggest problem that we have is that there's a group of people there that are in negative equity, which has been discussed in this House at length over the last while. There's a number of people that are hugely behind in their mortgages, and they have furnished records to their bank in relation to their personal finances. They have engaged the financial consultants, or indeed MABs, and they have been trying to park loans, and they have been trying to make sure that the roof is kept over their heads. And irrespective of what is being said, and solicitors that I've spoken to in relation to individual cases over the last week or two, the reality is that the banks are not engaging in relation to specific queries, or indeed in relation to serious hardship. I could name out, I could start here and name out the cases that I have in relation to banks, and I have been trying since with the last fortnight to make contact both electronically and by telephone and by writing in relation to one of the banks, and they have failed to come back to me at this stage because of the person that has a distressed loan is in a very distressed state themselves, an extremely distressed state themselves, and irrespective of what value or what issue is going to come down the line, I cannot understand how that they're going to impose property tax, because it simply isn't there with this person who built a house, who was now on €188 a week and no other income. It just simply isn't there. If they look at the basics for living, food and heating and so forth, it just isn't there. Not to mind if you go to other sectors, it is impossible. And I think that we're debating this bill again and again, and the issue on social housing, the issue in relation to communities that have developed housing, I suppose what would be known as in the communities as the sheltered housing associations. Where do they stand? Where do they stand in relation to their tenants? Where do they stand in relation to the advice they're getting, which is conflicting? And we haven't brought clarity to them things. But I suppose in the few minutes that I have, I just want to recap on it. I cannot understand how the property tax is going to be imposed in relation to the houses that don't have an energy cert. I cannot understand for elderly people who are talking about transferring property, or who are making decisions in relation to transfer of property, where the valuation that they might think of a house now, and when in some time in the future it goes through probate, or this process through the system, where are they going to end up? And the social housing, I think it is absolutely, we thought that there would be clarity brought to that issue. We are now assuming that it will be brought at committee stage, but it certainly is something that needs to be looked at, because the associations themselves are quite concerned, because a lot of these associations, I know that there are national associations, but indeed a lot of the local associations, the small communities that got together, they're wondering where are they fixed in this in relation to this property tax. And the bottom line, I feel, is that people will not be able to pay it. Many people that are coming to all of us in this House, is not just at this side of the House. I know that they're coming to every TD looking for advice and help in relation to engaging with banks and engaging with facilities for loans and for time and loans, and they're in a very, very, very distressed state. But the bottom line is that the money isn't there. We've seen, in a full year, you're talking about £500 million in relation to it. The money isn't simply there. It'll be taken out of the economy again, but it simply is not. We have people, the credit union surveys showed that there were many people that have ended up with €50 a month to spare after everything being paid. There are many people that have €50 at the other side, and that they are borrowing from parents or borrowing from anybody else to try and keep any relative they can to try and keep the wolf in the door. With kids going through school, with all they want to do the best for their families when they're going on to third level education, and particularly in rural communities, we're faced with a double whammy. We're faced with this, and of course the septic tank charges that are coming down the line, and many people don't know where they are going to end up with it. And I would appeal to the Minister and indeed the Government to rethink this, to rethink it long and hard, and not that we be back again discussing it with as my colleague had said, discuss it again on an amendment of an amendment. So with those few words, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The next group of speakers, Deputy Alan Farrell, Deputy Lawler and Deputy Bannon. I believe you're sharing time.
I believe so.
8 minutes, Deputy, 5 for Deputy Lawler and 7 minutes for Deputy Bannon. Is that agreed?
Agreed. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Deputy.
And I thank the Minister of State for his presence. This bill has identified a number of key issues raised at debate stage, which are now being written into this legislation, mainly in relation to exemptions for the most vulnerable, deferrals for low-income households and the reduction of rates for local authorities. And I welcome these as an improvement to the original bill introduced last year. As many in this House will know, I have campaigned since the introduction of the household charge, along with the late Shane McEntee, that homes that are affected by pyrite are without question unfinished due to the remediation works that will inevitably have to take place, and therefore should be included in the unfinished categories and given an exemption from the local property tax. I was looking forward very much, Cathaoirleach, to welcoming the amendment to this particular bill in respect to the property tax exemptions for properties affected by pyrite. I accept that it is not possible to grant blanket exemptions for properties that do not have proven existence of this material, but upon reading this legislation and taking in its detail, I, along with many affected homeowners, cannot but express my deep disappointment and indeed annoyance at the extent to which this exemption goes. The bar has been set far too high. The exemption was a chink of light for people who have been through hell and back, and I include myself, as I have mentioned in this House before, who have found pyritic material in their own floors, in their own properties, I should say, within the floor slab. And as details continue to emerge, that homes must in fact have Category 2 damage, which is a technical matter contained within the National Standards Authority of Ireland certification that is required under the legislation in order to qualify for this exemption. It is being cruelly removed due to the lack of foresight by the Department. And I would like to read into the record of this House one of the many correspondence that I received this morning from a constituent, and I hope the gentleman doesn't mind me reading it, but I won't identify him. I would like to quote, as I said, some correspondence that came in this morning. It won't make a difference which category a house with pyrite falls into. It doesn't change the fact that it still has pyrite and therefore cannot be sold. It cannot be too much to ask that any house that produces a positive test result should be exempt from the property tax until such time as their house is remediated. This is a sentiment that I share. If we take the number of affected homes identified in the Pyrite Panel report at 12,500, and the average house would be valued on a national average of 300,000, it's a total of 3.75 million that is due to be collected from pyrite affected properties. This is massively indeed overstated, and I'm just doing it for the purposes of discussion because, of course, those properties are not valued anywhere near the national average. In fact, some of them are completely without value, or simply the residual value of the property. So in worst case scenario for the Revenue Commissioners, we're talking about a loss of €3.75 million in a full year, 2014, and the target, as was well known by everybody in this House, is €500 million. It's a drop in the ocean, and I believe the Minister needs to seriously rethink the approach that has been taken. What this bill has done is disqualified owners who have paid for testing and have scientific proof that their properties contained pyrite, proof which up to this point has been accepted in higher places such as this Dáil, and of course I mean the courts. What about people who have had their homes tested and have visible signs but are in the Category 1 stage, as identified by the National Standards Authority of Ireland? How can we possibly tell them that their properties are not included, or who have actually covered up unsightly cracks in their properties, either through paint and plaster or wallpaper, etc.? Should they be punished for being house proud? Because that's what this standard that we are being asked to adhere to does. These family homes were bought at the peak of the boom in many cases, and with large mortgages. The entire industry abandoned them, and up until this point, up until recently, I should say, no one took responsibility for this issue, up until the point where the Minister for the Environment commissioned the Pyrite report, and the steps that have been taken since then. The property tax exemption was an opportunity for us to show recognition and support to these homeowners, and I believe that that is the right thing to have done and the right step and the right sentiment to extend to these homeowners. We committed last December that an exemption will be granted for homeowners, and in my view, and I don't say this lightly, I believe we've gone back on that commitment. I have a number of other comments to make, Cathaoirleach, in relation to the bill on a more positive side. This bill will ensure that homes that have been adapted for incapacitated persons will receive an exemption, and homes with disabled persons will receive a reduced rate. I commend the Minister for the sensitivity that he has extended to those, particularly those who have financial hardship as a result of incapacitation or disability. I welcome the exemptions for properties for various charitable organisations, and it is my view that the common sense approach has been taken in this particular issue, that recognition has been given to the sector that provides extraordinary service at minimum cost to the Exchequer. Properties purchased for charitable use and made possible through donations and through government funding and are used by citizens when they are most in need. Taxing this accommodation, I believe, is counterproductive exercise and would result in a reduction in the valuable service that charitable services provide. One of the major concerns that I've raised at a previous debate on the primary bill, which was the nature of how local charges were applied to local authority houses. And of course, while this is a complex issue, we don't want to put local authority tenants over the edge in terms of the rental revenue likely to be levied as a result. I believe, thank you, Cathaoirleach. I believe, however, that it made no sense for local authorities to be viable for a self-funding tax. However, there is a requirement, of course, for the burden to be shared right across all properties in the state, and in order to reduce the cost for all homeowners. I think that a decision to reduce the rate to a minimum charge for all local authority homes is actually a good resolution for now, and I stress that for a number of reasons. Firstly, it reduces the burden for local authorities in Dublin and other city local authorities where the value of properties would have meant higher rates versus their rural counterparts. This would have resulted once again in money going from Dublin and other urban areas to local government funds and it being distributed across the state. As someone who represents one of the largest Dublin constituency, I think it is fair that Fingal County Council will pay proportionately the same rate as their rural equivalents, particularly this is going towards a central fund in many cases. Unfortunately, Cathaoirleach, I don't have sufficient time to read through the rest of my speech, but I would like it to be read into the official record. I'd like to briefly mention the deferral scheme before I conclude. For homeowners with household incomes of 15,000 for a single person and 25,000 for a couple, who can avail of the option to pay at a later date or at half the deferral rate for option for family incomes below 35 but above 25. This measure is provided to allow breathing space for families at a time of temporary reduction in income. This was not set up to be an exemption. It is appropriate means of reducing the burden on this particular point in time where individuals may be, for instance, unable to find work or who may have a restricted family income due to commitments given in other areas. I'll finish on that note, Cathaoirleach, but I would request the rest of my notes are read into the record. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Just a number of points I suppose to start off with. And the bill has been very difficult for the general public out there to get their heads around it. The strange thing about it, and I said it before, was that in 1977 my father was a rate collector, and the rates were removed straight away, so he was out of a job. And at the time, and I've always believed that for local authorities to be sustainable, they had to have some way of revenue raising. And I've always believed in people locally should be paying for local services. And I've stated, even when I was a councillor, would have argued strongly. One thing was, again, rate increase on the commercial side, because it was in Kildare was going ahead of the rate of inflation at the time. but I would also have liked to have seen a much more fair and equitable base being put in place. So a number of points I want to raise, Minister. First of all, I do welcome the fact with regard to the people who changed their house to adapt it for disabilities. I had a number of PQs in about it before the bill was published, and I was delighted to see that the Minister had taken some of that on board. Just a couple of things that I'm a little bit nervous about, and these are probably situations that might only arise once in every 10,000 situations, but I refer back to The Field by John B. Keane, and in The Field there was an auction, and because two people were hungry for the field, it drove the price of the field above the guide price. And that is possible in a situation going forward where someone has a valuation on the property and is paying the tax based on the valuation of it on that. And in about 5 years' time, they put the property up for sale, and two people are interested in buying it. And there is a guide price which would have been similar to the price, the valuation that was there on it all along. And those two people are interested in purchasing it, and they drive the price way above the guide price. And there is a fear that the revenue will then come back after the vendor, claiming that he didn't put a proper valuation on his property all along. And because of a situation, an anomaly where a number of people were looking for the property had driven the price above the guide price there at the time, that there would be a fear that, and that happened in the Celtic Tiger, where people were looking, 2 or 3 more people. And it's something that should be considered in either as an amendment to this piece of legislation, that where abnormal situations occur, and that would be one, that there could be some way of rectifying it without it falling back on the vendor. The second thing is that we're talking about 65% being retained locally, maybe a little bit more. I would like to see more, because people who pay for something like to be identified with where that money is going. And if it's going into a big black hole, and I know big government has plenty of big black holes, if at all possible, that there could be some other way in which counties who are not generating, and I see my colleague here from Longford, who would not be generating the same rate base as, say, for example, my own county, Kildare, if there is some other way that it could be subsidised. Because invariably in large populated counties, you have more traffic on the roads, you have more usage of street lights, you have more need for playgrounds. So correspondingly, if people are paying a large number of people paying into the rates in that county, they should see the benefits of that. Therefore, I would argue for a larger percentage being retained in the county. I'm just going to have a bit of criticism of Sinn Féin, and the funny, when you do a little bit of research, it's a strange thing. Before, I would have called Sinn Féin a two-headed monster, a head that faces north and a head that faces south. And the head that faces north reacts differently totally than the head that faces south. And down here, they're shouting and roaring there shouldn't be property tax, there shouldn't be any sort of tax on people's homes. They're actually calling it a home tax. Yet here, as the rate poundages for the last 4 years up the north of Ireland, and a strange reading. I was on the Kildare County Council for a number of years during this period, and I would argue for a drop in commercial rates or maintaining the rate at the same level. And that's what has been done throughout the country here. Yet up the north of Ireland, where Sinn Féin are in charge, and I only have to go to Newry, where they have 14 of the 30 councillors there, and the rate has increased on a year-by-year basis for the ordinary people, and they are Irish people. So there are 2 categories of Irish people in this country, and I'm just after reading a synopsis of Animal Farm. An Animal Farm, it starts off, all animals are equal. And Napoleon eventually decides to change it all by stating, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So are Sinn Féin looking at the Irish down the south are more equal than the Irish up the north?
7. Property tax, household charges, water charges, and a licence for a television that you may or may not have, or the new face of stealth taxes in Ireland. Indeed, I say this as a government representative who resisted the concept of one stealth tax after another imposed by the previous administration. My conviction that such a burden, disguised in whatever format, is not justified remains the same. However, credit or discredit where it's due. The reality is that we're suffering from the fraud, corruption and cover-ups of Fianna Fáil. It is indisputable that Fianna Fáil agreed to this property tax with the EMF, and indeed with the Troika. They are responsible for bringing what the Taoiseach once described as a vampire tax on people. Fianna Fáil's actions in conspiracy with some developers, builders, bankers, indeed senior executives, left a meltdown that can now only be solidified by taxpayers. Fianna Fáil may in hindsight think it is sufficient to make false claims and look innocent. Make no mistake, despite denials, they are the ones who are picketing the pockets of our citizens, not that there's much left to take. And it's dreadful to look across the chamber here today and see not one member of Fianna Fáil, indeed not one member of Sinn Féin in the chamber today. And it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me when they voted down extra time on this important debate yesterday, when the Taoiseach offered them an opportunity to continue this debate until 5:30 today. Fianna Fáil and the Sinn Féin voted it down yesterday. From the moment the property tax was first mooted, it was implicit that while it had to be introduced, it would be fair. The outcry from all parts of the country, indeed my own constituency of Longford Westmeath, would indicate that this is not the case. Budget 2013 decreed that 3.5 billion must be raised, made up of 2.5 billion expenditure reduction, and most importantly, in the light of this debate, 1.25 billion to be raised in revenue. The mooted property tax became a reality, and it was Fianna Fáil who mooted it and who agreed it, and now they cry crocodile tears at its introduction. From each side of this House comes conflicting viewpoints on whether the Troika required Ireland to introduce a property tax or not. As laid down by Fianna Fáil's actions, they did. More specifically, debate is most heated as to whether we should or should not take heed of such requirements. We hear that we are the only country in Europe that doesn't have such a tax. What this line of arguments fails to take into account or into consideration is that in other EU countries they do not have the same punitive level of stamp duty as applied in Ireland. Indeed, I'd like to at this stage welcome, I point out the fact that on numerous occasions I made a special plea and indeed a strong plea to the Minister for Finance in relation to people who are in serious negative equity, and indeed I'd like to welcome his contribution this morning when he opened this debate, that there will be some concessions given. One way or the other, we're entrenched in a nightmare return to the horror of evictions driven by the corruption of the so-called elite. As history repeats itself, the landlord is not the English squire, but the effect is still the same. We have been forced once again to doff our hats, this time to Europe, but driven to poverty by the actions of our own, and particularly Fianna Fáil, indeed the Greens when they were in power. Of great concern to me, once again, is the historical context, is the effects that this tax will have on our architectural heritage, as people could be forced by hardship to unroof their fine houses to avoid this levy. As we seek to encourage tourism through the gathering and to generate interest in our heritage, this would be devastating. Heritage is the cornerstone of our tourism industry. We have seen the heritage budget shamefully cut over the last number of years. It is now time for a considered approach to the reality that taxation could be the last straw. Rural Ireland could be given a huge boost if exemptions could be linked to a willingness to open properties to the public as tourists in varying degrees. This, of course, would be dependent on the state being prepared to cover insurance costings, because we know what the cost of insurance is today, etc., and it costs probably more than the property tax to have public liability for people entering onto properties. The role of our fast disappearing great houses was woefully portrayed in a film I saw recently, Raja in the Rain. It portrayed a landed gentry whom many would consider I feel as more foreign than native. But the sad fact is that today only 30 such families occupy their original estates. Our Lamford author Mariah Edgeworth's novel Castle Rackham was based on the demise of such properties. Taxes and the astronomical cost of repairs is an impediment to the retention of such wonderful properties. We must guard against taxing our heritage homes, no matter how large or how small, to the point where they become impossible to maintain. I value our heritage in all its guise and don't want to see short-term gain lead to the destruction of everything that makes us unique. We must make no mistake. Lack of resources will lead to the destruction of our fine heritage. And as I say, in relation to the water charges, just as water cannot be taken from an empty well, you cannot take money from empty purses. Unprecedented demands can only, in the long term, be to the detriment of our valuable structural heritage. Heritage homes gives each individual locality a sense of place and identity and create a link to the past that cannot be replaced. Many fine houses disappeared in the 30s, 40s because of rates. In my own area of Lamford Westmeath, we lost Foxhall House, Dury Hall, Lizard House, Mount Jessup, Bawn House, and all in Lamford and Barnestown in County Westmeath, indeed many others. We are left with nothing more but ghostly presence of ruined estates to bear witness to another age. How much more relevant it would be to still have the reality. And just in conclusion, in my opinion, I believe that taxes such as the site value tax would be the way forward rather than a flawed property tax. And I thank you for your endurance and giving me that my 7 minutes. Thank you.
10 minutes.
Oh, I wouldn't share anything with Ross. I'm delighted to hear that the deputy will be voting against this bill. It's going to be. Some people might be surprised, but I'm very pleased. Oh God, you might as well have said it. I suppose it's there's been so many things said, and we've spoken so often on this issue of property tax, household charges, that it isn't easy to say much new about it. The basic principle remains the same, that this is an unfair tax at this particular time. And one of the big strong arguments of the government all along has been that, listen, they pay property tax in Europe, so we should pay it here. And but yes, we're all well aware of the fact, first of all, that no one ever paid stamp duty on a primary residence in Europe, whereas here they certainly have. And I've always argued that even someone who paid 200,000 for a house in Ireland If you paid 6% stamp duty on it, that was 12,000, and you run it through a mortgage over 25 years, it becomes 25. That's 1,000 a year. Stamp duty you're paying on your property all through the life of your mortgage, so that's actually a property tax. So I mean, it's actually disingenuous to say that we don't pay property tax here. We pay loads of it. And anyone that did have the pleasure of buying a house in Ireland in the last 20 years paid much more tax than his European counterpart. If you bought a house in Ireland for 300,000 and paid the relevant stamp duty on it at the time, which is 18,000 plus whatever it costs through your mortgage, and actually of the 300,000 that the builder got, he had to hand over 165,000 of that to the state in different forms, directly or indirectly, stamp duty, POE, there's the actual VAT on material bought, VAT on subcontract labour. I mean, to think that close to 60% of the money actually went to the state, it's beggars belief that the state actually think now that it's due an extra tax on that particular property through a house property tax. But I think that the main argument against the tax at the moment, and if someone had said to me that we would introduce a tax 10 years ago, even 5, 6 years ago on property, I would have said, yeah, okay, anyone that hasn't paid stamp duty on their property and they can afford to pay it, I wouldn't have actually objected to it. But given the dire place that so many people are in today, I think ability to pay is a serious factor. And I think before you impose a tax on somebody, ability to pay has to be considered. And that's what we do with income tax. Income tax is based, it's a direct taxation, it's based on ability to pay. The more you earn, the more you pay, and that's fair enough. And I actually believe that income tax in Ireland should be higher, like it is in the Nordic countries, where they have much more, a better welfare system than we have here, much more higher level of services, because they collect the money at source from those who can afford to pay it. And it was very disappointing in the last budget that the coalition didn't see fit to raise income tax on monies earned over 100,000, because listen, if you earn over 100,000 and you only pay the normal tax up to 100,000 and pay the extra on money over it, I mean, it's very hard to argue that it would be unfair to do that. And I think that most fair-minded citizens in this state would have seen it as a progressive move. You know, likewise, there's, I mean, we're aware of the fact that there has been a growing level of inequality in Ireland. And in the last 5 years, those who are best off have actually, they hardly know what austerity means. I mean, I don't know if they can spell it, because it doesn't actually impact on them in the same way at all. And their wealth level has actually increased. Whereas over half the people of Ireland now, I think, are in a very difficult place. Now, whether the government is aware of this, I'm not so sure, because you do things which almost prove that you don't actually take this on board. I was at a briefing on Wednesday, I think it was, with former workers of the IBRC, and it was frightening listening to them. I mean, they had 5 workers turned up, and 2 of them cried as they were speaking. You know, they just don't know how they're going to deal with the household bills, and they don't know if they can look after their families in a way. And we're not talking about people that were making crazy money. In fact, I was shocked to hear that the average wage in the IBRC was 46,000, despite the fact that 5 guys were making over 500,000, which is a bit mad. But I mean, the average wage of the people laid off was 46,000. I mean, that's just, you know, given that if we look at the average wage in Anglo when it fell, and in AIB even today, it's of a much higher amount altogether. But I mean, you know, the government has told these people signed an agreement only 2 years ago, I think it was, as to how their work terms would work out, what they would get in terms of redundancy when the company